You are already inside it. Before this moment finishes forming, something in you has labeled it, interpreted it, decided what it means. That decision feels invisible, automatic, unquestionable, and yet it is quietly shaping what this moment becomes for you. Two people can stand in the same place, hear the same words, live through the same event, and walk away inhabiting completely different realities. Not opinions, realities. This is not coincidence, and it is not personality. It is observation at work. What if reality is not a fixed stage you move across, but a responsive field that changes according to how you look at it? What if your presence is not neutral, but participatory? Before asking what is happening in your life, a more precise question waits underneath. How are you seeing it right now? From the moment you learned to name things, the world began to feel solid. A chair was a chair, the sky was the sky. Events happened out there independent of you, like pieces on a board already placed before you arrived. This idea of an objective world, fixed, stable, and separate, became so familiar that it stopped being questioned. It felt like common sense. Yet much of what feels obvious has a way of dissolving when you look closely enough. Consider how quickly certainty appears. You walk into a room and immediately know what kind of place it is: friendly or tense, safe or uncomfortable, productive or draining. You don't consciously analyze it. The impression simply arrives, fully formed. But where did it come from? The walls did not announce it. The air did not explain itself. Something in you assembled that reality before you could stop it. If the world were truly objective, why would it speak so differently to different people? Physics quietly challenged this assumption long ago, though the implications rarely make it into daily life. At the most basic level of matter, things do not behave like solid objects waiting to be observed. They exist as probabilities, tendencies, potentials. Only when measured do they appear in a definite state. This is not philosophy, it is observation. Without an interaction, without a point of reference, there is no single outcome to point to. What we call the world is not a finished product sitting on a shelf. It is closer to a process that completes itself in relationship. Yet the deeper illusion is not about subatomic particles. It is about how easily the mind mistakes its interpretations for facts. Two people witness the same conversation. One walks away feeling respected, the other feels dismissed. Both are convinced they saw what really happened. Each could recount details, tone, timing, and yet their realities are incompatible. If the world were objective in the way we assume, this would be impossible. There would be one clear event, one clear meaning. Instead, there are two lived worlds unfolding side by side. From early on, you were trained to ignore this gap. School rewarded the right answer, not the process of perception. Culture encouraged agreement on appearances, not inquiry into experience. Over time, you learn to trust what you see without asking how you see. The observer disappeared from the picture. Reality became something that simply happens to you, not something that arises with you. This is where the illusion tightens. When you believe the world is fixed, you stop noticing your role in shaping it. Your reactions feel justified, automatic, even inevitable. Anyone would feel this way, you tell yourself. That's just how it is. But what you are really saying is, this is how it appears from here, through this particular set of memories, expectations, and emotional habits. The distinction matters, because what feels objective is often just familiar. Notice how quickly meaning attaches itself to events. A delayed message becomes a sign of disinterest. A short reply becomes evidence of irritation. A missed opportunity becomes proof that life is unfair. None of these meanings are contained in the event itself. They arise from the observer meeting the event. And once they arise, they color everything that follows. The world begins to confirm what you already believe you are seeing. This is why the idea of an objective world is so seductive. It relieves you of responsibility. If things are simply that way, there is nothing to examine. No need to look at where your attention goes, what it lingers on, what it avoids. You can move through life reacting instead of observing, certain that your view is the view. The cost of this certainty is subtle but cumulative. Curiosity fades, nuance disappears, and experience flattens into repetition. There is a quieter truth beneath all this. The world you encounter is not raw reality. It is reality filtered through attention. What stands out? What fades into the background? What feels important or threatening? All of this depends on where your awareness rests. The illusion of objectivity hides this fact by making attention seem irrelevant, as if seeing were a passive act. It is not. Seeing is selective, and selection is creative. Once you sense this, even faintly, the ground begins to shift. You may notice that when your focus changes, the same environment feels different. Not because the world rearranged itself, but because different aspects came into view. What was always there becomes visible. What dominated before loses its grip. Reality feels less like a wall you bump into and more like a field you move through. This is not about denying facts or pretending everything is subjective fantasy. It is about recognizing that facts alone do not make a world. Meaning does. Experience does. And both depend on how and where you are looking. The so-called objective world is not an enemy to be defeated. It is an incomplete story, missing its most essential character. As this begins to sink in, a natural question emerges, often without words. If the world I experience is shaped by observation, what exactly is guiding my attention moment to moment? What am I feeding with my focus without realizing it? The answer does not come from thinking harder, but from noticing where your awareness goes when nothing is demanding it. And that noticing opens the door to something even more subtle, the invisible force of attention itself, quietly assembling the reality you believe you are simply living in. Attention is often mistaken for something passive, almost mechanical, as if it were just a flashlight that turns on automatically when something interesting appears. But attention is not neutral, and it is never idle. Even when you believe you are simply taking in the world, your attention is actively selecting, amplifying, and ignoring. It works quietly, beneath conscious thought, yet it determines far more than most people realize. Think about how much of your environment you never truly see. The steady hum of distant sounds, the weight of your body in a chair, the expressions on faces you pass every day. These things exist, but they only enter your reality when attention touches them. The moment it does, they gain presence. Before that, they are effectively absent from your lived world. This is not because they are unreal, but because attention is the gateway through which reality becomes experience. What you attend to begins to organize itself. Patterns appear where none were noticed before. Connections form, meaning thickens. If your attention repeatedly lands on threat, life starts to feel hostile. If it settles on lack, the world seems scarce. If it rests on possibility, doors appear where walls once stood. The external conditions may not have changed at all, yet the reality you are moving through feels completely different. This is not imagination at work. It is perception shaping experience in real time. Attention also has a memory. Where it has gone before, it tends to return. This is why certain thoughts feel magnetic, why familiar worries reappear without effort, why the same kinds of situations seem to repeat themselves. Attention learns your habits and follows them faithfully. Over time, this creates the impression that life itself is repetitive or stuck, when in fact it is attention tracing the same grooves again and again. Most people never consciously choose these grooves. They inherit them. From family, culture, past experiences, and unexamined conclusions. Attention is pulled toward what feels relevant, and relevance is often defined by emotion. A painful memory sharpens attention. A fear tightens it. An unresolved desire keeps it scanning. Long before you decide what matters, attention has already decided for you, based on what once felt important to survival or belonging. This is why attention is invisible, yet powerful. You rarely notice it directly. You notice what it lands on, not the landing itself. The world feels like it is demanding your focus, when in reality, your focus is constantly constructing the world that feels demanding. The phone notification, the news headline, the passing comment from someone else, these are not inherently commanding. They become commanding when attention locks onto them and feeds them with significance. There is a subtle feedback loop here. Attention highlights something. The mind assigns meaning, emotion reinforces it, and attention returns with even more intensity. Soon, what you focus on feels undeniably real, heavy, unavoidable. At that point, it no longer feels like a choice. It feels like truth. And yet, if attention were to withdraw, even slightly, the intensity would soften. The same situation would still exist, but its grip on you would loosen. This does not mean you can simply force attention to go elsewhere. Attention resists force. It responds to interest, emotion, and familiarity. Trying to wrestle it away often strengthens what you are trying to escape. Instead, attention shifts when something more compelling appears, or when awareness steps back far enough to notice the act of focusing itself. In that moment, the spell weakens. You are no longer fully inside the content of experience. You are aware of how experience is being formed. When attention is unconscious, it narrows, it fixates. It turns the world into a tunnel where only certain signals get through. When attention becomes conscious, it widens. Peripheral details re-enter. Context returns. You begin to see not just the object of focus, but the field around it. This widening does not erase problems or challenges, but it changes your relationship to them. They become part of a larger picture rather than the whole picture. This is where many people misunderstand the phrase, "What you focus on grows." It is not about positive thinking or denying difficulty. It is about recognizing that sustained attention gives continuity to experience. It gives events a storyline. What you repeatedly attend to becomes familiar, and what is familiar feels real, stable, and true. Meanwhile, what you ignore withers from your lived reality, even if it remains physically present. As you begin to sense this, a new layer of responsibility appears, not as a burden but as a possibility. If attention is shaping what feels real, then learning to notice where it goes is not a small skill. It is foundational, yet attention does not operate in isolation. It is deeply influenced by what you already believe to be true. Beliefs quietly steer attention, telling it where to look and what to disregard. And so a subtle question starts to form beneath the surface of awareness. If attention is the spotlight, who is holding the script that tells it what matters? What assumptions are guiding it before you ever get a chance to intervene? To explore that, it becomes necessary to look at the lenses you are wearing, those deeply held beliefs that quietly instruct attention on what reality is allowed to be. There is a particular phrase people use when they no longer want to look any deeper. That's just the way it is. It sounds harmless, even realistic, practical, mature. But hidden inside those words is a decision to stop observing. The moment something is labeled as fixed, unquestionable, or simply how life works, attention freezes around it. Possibility quietly exits the room. Beliefs are not loud. They do not announce themselves as beliefs. They arrive disguised as facts, as common sense, as conclusions any reasonable person would reach. This is what makes them so powerful. When you believe something just is that way, you stop testing it against experience. You stop noticing exceptions. You stop seeing movement where movement still exists. Reality then appears to confirm your belief, not because it must, but because your perception has narrowed around it. Notice how quickly a belief organizes your world. If you believe people cannot be trusted, your attention becomes alert for signs of betrayal. A delayed response, a vague comment, a change in tone, each one stands out sharply. Moments of honesty or care fade into the background. Over time, your lived reality fills with evidence that seems undeniable. The belief feels proven. Yet what has really happened is that attention has been trained to collect only what fits the story. Beliefs act like lenses placed in front of awareness. They do not create what you see from nothing, but they bend it. They emphasize certain angles and blur others. Two people can look at the same event through different beliefs and walk away living in different worlds. One sees opportunity where the other sees threat. One sees feedback where the other sees rejection. Neither is lying. Each is faithfully experiencing reality as filtered through what they already believe to be true. This is why arguing with beliefs rarely works. Presenting new information does little when perception itself is shaped by the belief you are trying to challenge. The mind is not a neutral judge weighing evidence. It is a loyal attorney defending the story it already knows. Anything that contradicts it is minimized, explained away, or forgotten. Anything that supports it is highlighted and remembered. In this way, beliefs become self-reinforcing loops. Many of the beliefs guiding your life were never consciously chosen. They were absorbed, formed in moments of emotional intensity, repeated often enough to feel permanent. A childhood experience hardens into a rule about relationships. A single failure becomes a statement about your limits. Over time, these conclusions settle into the background and begin to operate automatically. You do not wake up each day deciding to believe them. You simply see the world through them. Once a belief is in place, behavior follows without much deliberation. You approach some situations cautiously, others with confidence. You avoid certain risks and pursue others. These behaviors then shape the outcomes you experience. The outcomes appear to validate the belief, and the cycle tightens. At no point does it feel like imagination is at work. It feels like reality revealing itself honestly. This is why change often feels so difficult. It is not that life resists you, it is that your beliefs quietly instruct you on what is possible, appropriate, or likely. When you believe something cannot change, you unconsciously stop offering it the conditions under which change might occur. You do not listen as openly. You do not experiment. You do not stay with uncertainty long enough for something new to emerge. The belief does not need to block reality, it only needs to narrow your participation in it. There is a subtle emotional payoff here as well. Beliefs provide certainty. Even painful beliefs offer a sense of orientation. Knowing what to expect feels safer than entering the unknown. Letting go of a belief can feel like losing the ground beneath your feet. This is why the mind clings to just the way it is, even when it hurts. The familiar pain feels more manageable than unfamiliar possibility. Yet beliefs are not as solid as they appear. They are patterns of thought sustained by attention and reinforced by emotion. When examined gently, without trying to replace them with something better, cracks begin to show. You start noticing moments that do not quite fit, small exceptions, brief experiences that contradict the rule. These moments are usually dismissed at first. They feel insignificant, but they are signals that the belief is not the whole story. As this noticing grows, something shifts. The belief loosens its grip, just enough for curiosity to enter. Instead of asking, "Is this true or false?" a quieter question arises. "How am I seeing this?" That question does not attack the belief, it steps around it. It brings attention back to the process of perception rather than the content of thought. This is where beliefs begin to reveal their dependence on the mind itself. They are not external laws imposed on you. They are interpretations maintained in real time, and interpretations require an interpreter. As awareness turns toward that interpreter, toward the mental activity that filters, labels, and predicts, another layer of experience becomes visible. You begin to sense that what feels like an unchangeable world may actually be a world continuously edited before you ever consciously see it. At that point, the focus naturally shifts from what you believe to how those beliefs are formed and applied moment by moment. And this leads directly into a deeper realization. The mind is not a passive receiver of reality, but an active editor, cutting, arranging, and coloring experience before it ever reaches conscious awareness. The moment you think you are seeing the world, the mind has already been at work. Long before an experience reaches conscious awareness, it is trimmed, sorted, and arranged. Sensory information arrives in overwhelming volume, far more than you could ever process directly. If everything came through unfiltered, experience would be chaos. The mind's solution is to edit reality in real time, selecting what seems relevant and discarding the rest. This editing happens so quickly that it feels invisible. You do not notice the cut, only the finished scene. By the time you register an event, it already carries meaning, emotion, and context. What you experience as "what happened" is actually the end product of countless micro-decisions made beneath awareness. The mind decides what counts as foreground and what fades into background, what deserves attention and what can be ignored. Memory plays a central role in this process. Every new moment is compared against stored experiences, expectations, and learned patterns. If something resembles a past threat, the mind sharpens its focus. If it resembles a familiar routine, it dulls it. This is efficient, but it is not neutral. The past quietly informs the present, shaping perception before you ever have a chance to respond consciously. You are not only seeing what is in front of you, you're seeing through layers of accumulated history. Emotion is another powerful editor. It highlights certain details and distorts others. When you are anxious, neutral events can feel charged. When you are hopeful, obstacles seem lighter. The same external conditions can produce entirely different internal landscapes, depending on the emotional state through which they are filtered. Yet it rarely feels like a filter is at work. It feels like the world itself has changed tone. Language further refines the edit. The moment something is named, it is framed. A comment becomes criticism or feedback. A pause becomes awkward or thoughtful. These labels do not merely describe experience. They organize it. They tell the mind how to respond, what to expect next, what emotions are appropriate. Once a label is applied, perception tends to follow it, filling in details that support the story and overlooking those that do not. What makes this editing so convincing is its speed. There is no obvious gap between raw sensation and interpreted reality. The transition is seamless. You feel as though you are directly encountering the world, when in fact you are encountering a version of it that has already been shaped for coherence and survival. This is not deception. It is function. Without this editing, navigating daily life would be nearly impossible. The difficulty arises when the edit is mistaken for the original footage. When the mind's version of reality is treated as reality itself, flexibility disappears. You stop questioning your impressions. Reactions feel justified because they seem to be responses to what is, rather than to an internal reconstruction. This is where misunderstandings solidify and patterns repeat. The editor becomes invisible and the edit becomes unquestionable. Notice how quickly the mind fills in gaps. A glance is interpreted as judgment, silence becomes disapproval. An unexpected change is framed as a problem. In many cases, there is insufficient information to draw these conclusions, yet the mind supplies them instantly. It prefers a complete story to an open question. Uncertainty feels uncomfortable, so the editor resolves it as fast as possible, even if accuracy is sacrificed. This tendency becomes especially strong when attention is narrow and beliefs are rigid. The editor works overtime to maintain consistency. Anything that challenges the existing narrative is softened, reframed, or excluded. Over time, you may find yourself living inside a very specific version of reality, one that feels stable but also limiting. New possibilities struggle to appear because the editor keeps cutting them out before they fully form. Becoming aware of this process does not mean stopping it. The mind will always edit. That is its role. Awareness simply creates a slight distance between you and the edit. In that space, you may begin to notice the moment where interpretation begins. A thought appears, a conclusion forms, an emotion follows. When this sequence becomes visible, it loses some of its authority. You are no longer completely inside the story, you are watching it assemble. This shift is subtle. It does not arrive as a dramatic revelation, but as a growing sensitivity to how experience is constructed. You might catch yourself mid-reaction, sensing that what you are responding to is not the event itself, but the meaning assigned to it. This does not eliminate reaction, but it introduces choice. You can stay with the initial edit, or you can allow the scene to remain unfinished a little longer. However, this awareness is fragile. The mind prefers automation. Left unchecked, it quickly returns to old habits, editing on autopilot. When that happens, life feels repetitive, predictable, and often exhausting. The same triggers produce the same responses, and you find yourself reacting before you realize what is happening. This is why the greatest limitation is not the mind's editing, but the absence of conscious observation of it. When the editor runs the show unnoticed, you live inside conditioned responses rather than lived presence. And this brings the inquiry to a critical edge. What happens when you stop observing the editor at work? What kind of life unfolds when perception is driven almost entirely by habit, without conscious participation? There is a point where efficiency quietly turns into absence. The mind learns your routines, your preferences, your usual reactions, and begins to run them without asking. This is what most people call normal life. You wake up, move through familiar patterns, respond in expected ways, and arrive at the end of the day with a sense that time has passed, but something essential was missing. Not because anything went wrong, but because very little was actually observed. Living on autopilot does not feel dramatic. It feels practical. Decisions are faster, reactions are immediate, and there is a comforting sense of continuity. You know who you are supposed to be, how you usually feel, what tends to happen next. The problem is not that autopilot exists. The problem is that it becomes the default. When it does, experience shrinks to a loop of conditioned responses, and life begins to feel like repetition rather than discovery. On autopilot, perception is shallow. You see just enough to function, not enough to truly encounter what is happening. Conversations are half heard while you prepare your reply. Places are passed through without being noticed. Even emotions become predictable. You already know how you will react before the situation fully unfolds. This creates the strange sensation of watching your life from a distance, as if it were happening slightly ahead of you. The mind favors autopilot because it conserves energy. Conscious observation requires effort. It asks you to stay present with uncertainty, to feel without immediately categorizing, to notice without rushing to conclude. Autopilot avoids all of this. It relies on past edits, familiar beliefs, and rehearsed interpretations. The present moment is treated as a variation of what has already happened, rather than something new. Over time, this has a subtle effect on vitality. When nothing feels new, curiosity fades. When reactions are automatic, responsibility blurs. You begin to feel as though life is happening to you rather than with you. Challenges feel heavier, not because they are greater, but because they are met with tired patterns that have already failed to resolve them. Joy feels muted, because it too is filtered through expectation. Autopilot also creates a sense of inevitability. Because responses are habitual, outcomes appear fixed. The same conversations lead to the same tensions. The same choices lead to the same results. It becomes easy to conclude that this is simply how things are. In reality, it is how you are meeting them. But that distinction is hard to see from inside the loop. One of the most telling signs of autopilot is the absence of real choice. You may believe you are choosing, but the options feel narrow and familiar. You pick from what you already know, rather than sensing what is actually available in the moment. The mind reaches for the closest pattern and applies it automatically. There is little space between stimulus and response, and in that absence of space, freedom quietly disappears. This does not mean autopilot is wrong or useless. Without it, you could not drive a car, learn a skill, or navigate daily tasks. The issue arises when autopilot extends beyond mechanics into perception itself. When it decides what things mean before you consciously engage, it becomes a cage rather than a tool. You stop discovering reality and start recycling it. The irony is that many people believe they are fully conscious simply because they are thinking. But thinking is often the most automated process of all. Thoughts repeat themes, recycle worries, replay familiar narratives. Awareness, by contrast, is not repetitive. It is fresh. It notices details that do not fit the script. It senses shifts in tone, energy, and feeling that autopilot glosses over. Breaking free from autopilot does not require dramatic change. It begins with interruption, a pause long enough to notice that you are reacting. A moment of curiosity about why a certain situation triggers the same response every time. This pause is small, but it is disruptive in the best sense. It introduces a gap where observation can enter. In that gap, something unexpected happens. You realize that you are not obligated to follow the first impulse. You can feel irritation without immediately expressing it. You can notice fear without letting it steer the entire situation. This does not mean suppressing emotion. It means seeing it clearly enough that it no longer runs the show unseen. As these moments of interruption increase, autopilot loosens. Life begins to regain texture. Situations that once felt dull or predictable reveal nuances. People surprise you again. Even challenges feel different, not because they disappear, but because you are no longer meeting them with a single worn-out response. This is where the quality of your inner state becomes impossible to ignore. You start to sense that reality responds less to what you say or intend, and more to the tone with which you meet each moment. The way you are present seems to matter as much as what you do, and this naturally leads to a deeper question. If autopilot dulls perception and presence sharpens it, what exactly is the signal you are sending into the world when you are not fully aware? Most people believe that reality responds to what they say, decide, or consciously ask for. They assume that clear intentions and well-chosen words are enough to shape outcomes. Yet experience often contradicts this. You can say you want peace and still feel surrounded by conflict. You can declare confidence while your actions subtly communicate hesitation. Something beneath language is at work, something more constant and more revealing than words. That underlying signal is the state you are in while you move through the world. It is not mystical in the dramatic sense, but it is subtle. Your posture, your tone, your timing, your emotional availability, all of these broadcast information long before you speak. People respond to it instinctively. Situations seem to organize around it. This is what many traditions point to when they speak of vibration, not as an abstract frequency, but as the felt quality of presence you bring into each moment. Words are intermittent. They appear and disappear. Your inner state is continuous. It accompanies you into every interaction, every decision, every silence. You may say one thing, but if your inner state contradicts it, the contradiction is felt. A request spoken from tension carries a different weight than the same request spoken from ease. An offer made from anxiety does not land the same as one made from clarity. Reality does not respond to the script. It responds to the tone beneath it. You can see this clearly in everyday interactions. Two people deliver the same message. One is received openly, the other defensively. The difference is not in the words, but in the energy behind them. Subtle cues signal safety or threat, openness or control. These cues shape how others respond, often without conscious awareness. Over time, they also shape the kinds of situations you find yourself in. This is why effort alone often fails to produce change. You can try very hard to be patient while your body remains tense. You can try to appear confident while your attention is filled with doubt. The effort is visible, but so is the strain. Reality tends to meet strain with resistance. Not out of punishment, but out of resonance. Tension invites tension. Ease invites ease. This is not a moral statement, it is an observational one. Your internal state is shaped by many factors: past experiences, current beliefs, habitual thoughts, and unprocessed emotion. Most of the time it operates below awareness. You may not notice that you are bracing for disappointment, scanning for problems, or subtly expecting rejection. Yet these expectations color your perception and influence your behavior. You ask questions differently. You listen selectively. You interpret responses through a preset filter. The world then appears to confirm what you felt all along. This can create confusion. You tell yourself you are open, but situations keep closing down. You believe you are clear, but outcomes remain muddled. From the inside, it feels like bad luck or external obstruction. From a wider view, it is coherence at work. The inner state and the outer response are aligned, even if you are not aware of the alignment. None of this means you must monitor yourself constantly or strive for a perfect inner state. That would only add another layer of tension. The shift begins with noticing. When you notice the quality of your presence without trying to fix it, something softens. Awareness itself has a regulating effect. It brings unconscious patterns into view where they can begin to change naturally. As awareness grows, you may start to sense moments when your words and your state are misaligned. You might hear yourself say yes while your body tightens, or say no while your mind keeps justifying. These moments are informative. They reveal where you are not fully congruent, where your vibration and your language are telling different stories. Seeing this clearly is more effective than forcing alignment through willpower. When your inner state shifts even slightly, the world often responds in subtle ways. Conversations flow more easily. Obstacles feel less personal. Opportunities seem to appear without being chased. It can feel uncanny, but it is not mysterious. You are meeting reality from a different place, and reality is meeting you back in kind. This responsiveness is not about control. You are not manipulating the world with your mood. You are participating in a relational field where everything influences everything else. Your presence affects the field, and the field affects you. When this is understood, attention naturally turns inward, not to escape the world, but to meet it more honestly. This inward turn reveals something important. The quality of your vibration depends less on what you intend and more on how present you are. When presence deepens, reactivity decreases. When reactivity decreases, perception clears. And in that clarity, a new possibility emerges. The ability to observe experience without immediately trying to shape it. That observation is not passive. It is an active, grounded presence that does not rush to judge or fix. It is here that a different kind of influence begins, one that does not rely on effort or assertion. And this naturally leads into the next inquiry. How does becoming a true observing presence alter the way reality unfolds around you? Breaking the cycle does not begin with changing circumstances, correcting thoughts, or improving behavior. It begins at a quieter point, one that is often overlooked because it does not announce itself with effort or strategy. The observing presence is not something you create. It is something you allow to come forward when you stop being completely absorbed in what is happening. In that allowance, the entire relationship with reality begins to shift. Most of the time, experience is lived from inside reactions. A thought appears and is immediately believed. An emotion arises and is immediately acted upon or resisted. Attention collapses into the content of experience, and the observer disappears. From there, life feels like a series of forces acting on you. The observing presence interrupts this collapse. It does not fight reactions or suppress emotions. It simply notices them as events occurring within awareness. This noticing changes the structure of experience. When a thought is seen as a thought, it loosens. When an emotion is felt without being justified or explained, it moves. The observing presence does not analyze or label. It stays with what is happening as it is. This staying is what breaks the cycle. Reactivity feeds on unconsciousness. When awareness enters, the momentum slows. What makes this presence powerful is its neutrality. It does not side with or against what is observed. There is no urgency to improve the moment or escape it. This neutrality is often misunderstood as indifference, but it is the opposite. It is an intimate contact with experience without distortion. In that contact, things reveal themselves more honestly. When you observe without immediately interpreting, you begin to notice how quickly meaning is added. A sensation arises in the body and is instantly named as anxiety or excitement. A thought flashes through the mind and is treated as a prediction or a warning. The observing presence sees this layering happen in real time. It does not remove the layers, but it prevents you from being lost in them. This creates space between stimulus and response, space between feeling and action. In that space, choice becomes possible again. Not the kind of choice that comes from deliberation, but the kind that comes from clarity. You may still respond, but the response is less compulsive. It carries less residue from the past and more relevance to the present. The observing presence also has a regulating effect on the inner state you bring into the world. When you are caught in reaction, your presence is tight, charged, and directional. When you are observing, your presence softens and widens. This shift is subtle, but it is felt by others and reflected by situations. Conversations become less confrontational without you trying to be agreeable. Decisions become clearer without you forcing certainty. One of the most important aspects of this presence is that it does not require withdrawal from life. You do not need silence, isolation, or special conditions. Observation can occur in the middle of activity, conversation, and challenge. In fact, it becomes most meaningful there. The moment you notice yourself tightening, rushing, or defending, observation is already present. You are no longer fully identified with the reaction. At first, this presence appears intermittently. You catch glimpses of it between thoughts or emotions. These glimpses may seem insignificant, but they accumulate. Each time you observe instead of react, a new pattern is reinforced. Over time, the observing presence becomes more accessible, less fragile. It begins to feel like a stable background rather than a fleeting interruption. As this stabilizes, something unexpected happens. The need to control outcomes weakens. You realize that much of what you were trying to manage was a response to discomfort, not to reality itself. When discomfort is met with observation rather than resistance, it loses its power to dictate behavior. You become less reactive without becoming passive. This is where the cycle truly breaks. Not because life stops presenting challenges, but because those challenges no longer trigger the same automatic responses. The past loses some of its authority over the present. Patterns that once felt inevitable begin to dissolve, not through force, but through lack of fuel. Yet this observing presence is not the final step. As it deepens, it reveals something more confronting. When you observe without judgment, you begin to see how much of what you react to in the world mirrors what is unresolved or unseen within you. Irritation, attraction, resistance, these become signals rather than problems. The world starts to feel less like an external opponent and more like a reflective surface. And in that reflection, another realization quietly waits. What you have been observing as out there may never have been separate from you at all. At some point, observation turns back on itself. What began as noticing reactions and perceptions gradually reveals a more unsettling pattern. The qualities that move you most in the world, what attracts you, irritates you, inspires you, or provokes you, are not random. They follow a logic that is deeply personal. The shock is not philosophical, it is experiential. You begin to sense that you are not simply encountering the world, you are encountering yourself through it. This realization can feel disorienting because it challenges a lifelong assumption. You have been taught to believe that your reactions are caused by external events. Someone behaves a certain way, therefore you feel something. A situation unfolds, therefore you respond. But as observation deepens, the sequence begins to look different. The reaction is already prepared. The event merely activates it. The world becomes the stage on which inner patterns play themselves out. Notice how selective emotional charge is. Countless things happen around you every day, yet only a few evoke strong responses. Those responses are not proportional to the events themselves. A small comment can sting deeply, while a major disruption barely registers. This imbalance is revealing. It suggests that what you are responding to is not the surface event, but something it touches inside you. The mind prefers to locate the cause outside. It is more comfortable to believe that irritation is caused by someone else's behavior than to feel the vulnerability it points to. It is easier to blame circumstances than to sense the expectations, fears, or unmet needs they trigger. Projection protects identity. It keeps attention pointed outward, away from what feels unfinished or uncertain within. Yet the world is remarkably consistent in what it brings to your attention. Similar themes repeat across different contexts. The same kinds of conflicts, the same disappointments, the same attractions appear in new forms. If you look closely, the pattern is not in the world, it is in the lens through which you meet it. The external details change, but the inner response remains familiar. This does not mean the world is imaginary, or that others are merely extensions of you. It means that experience is co-created. What you notice, emphasize, and react to shapes what stands out as meaningful. The inner landscape and the outer environment meet, and from that meeting a specific reality emerges. What feels like projection is not a flaw, it is a function of perception. The shock comes from recognizing how much of what you thought was objective is actually intimate. The traits you admire often reflect qualities you are developing or longing to express. The behaviors you condemn often mirror aspects you have disowned or suppressed. Even indifference can be revealing, pointing to areas where emotional engagement has been withdrawn. The world becomes a diagnostic tool, constantly offering feedback. This realization can initially feel unsettling, even uncomfortable. If the world is reflecting you, then there is no one to blame and nowhere to hide. But there is also an unexpected relief in this. If what you experience is connected to how you see, then change does not require controlling the outside. It requires honesty on the inside. Projection thrives in unconsciousness. When you are unaware of your inner state, it spills outward and appears as an external problem. When awareness is present, projection loses its grip. You can still feel irritation or attraction, but you see it as information rather than truth. The reaction becomes a message rather than a verdict. This shift transforms relationships. Instead of asking, "Why are they like this?" a different question arises. What in me is being touched right now? This question is not self-blame. It is self-inquiry. It redirects attention from judgment to understanding. In doing so, it opens space for responses that are less defensive and more precise. As this practice deepens, the boundary between inner and outer begins to feel less rigid. You sense that reality is not happening on one side of a line while you stand on the other. There is an ongoing exchange. Your state influences what you perceive, and what you perceive influences your state. The separation you once took for granted starts to dissolve. This is where the shock matures into clarity. You realize that the world has never been a fixed backdrop. It has always been interactive, responsive, and revealing. What you call out there has been quietly guiding you back to what is unseen within, not as punishment or reward, but as reflection. And as this reflection becomes clearer, another possibility comes into view. If what you see is shaped by you, then there may be a way of meeting reality that reduces distortion altogether. A way of seeing that does not project meaning so quickly, that allows experience to remain closer to what it is before interpretation sets in. That possibility points towards something many never consider: the existence of a more neutral reality, waiting beneath the layers of projection, ready to be encountered differently. When projection begins to loosen, something unexpected becomes noticeable. Beneath the layers of interpretation, reaction, and personal meaning, there is a quieter field of experience that has been there all along. It does not announce itself with emotion or urgency. It does not argue for a particular conclusion. It simply is. This is what can be called a neutral reality, not empty, not lifeless, but unclaimed. Neutral does not mean indifferent. It means undecided. Before an event becomes good or bad, before it becomes success or failure, before it becomes personal, there is a raw moment of occurrence. A sound, a movement, a sensation, a change. The meaning arrives afterward. Most of the time, that arrival is so fast that you never notice the gap. But when awareness is present, the gap reveals itself, and within it a choice quietly waits. This neutral layer of reality is not something you create. It is what remains when interpretation pauses. A conversation before it is taken personally, a delay before it is labeled as rejection, a challenge before it becomes a threat to identity. In that brief suspension, experience feels open, unfinished. It has not yet been folded into the story of who you are or how life treats you. The reason this neutrality feels unfamiliar is because the mind is trained to resolve ambiguity quickly. Meaning gives orientation. It tells you how to respond, what to feel, where to stand. Neutrality offers none of that immediately. It asks you to stay present without knowing. For many, this feels uncomfortable at first, even unsettling, but discomfort is not danger. It is simply the absence of a familiar narrative. When you remain with this neutral field, something subtle happens. Sensations become clearer. Details sharpen without being exaggerated. You notice more but react less. The body softens because it is no longer bracing against an assumed outcome. The mind slows, not because it is forced to, but because there is less to defend. In this space, choice becomes possible in a different way. Not as a mental decision, but as a direction of attention. You can allow meaning to arise consciously rather than automatically. You can respond from what is actually present instead of from what is expected. This does not make life passive or detached. It makes it precise. Neutral reality is often mistaken for emotional flatness, but it is closer to clarity. From clarity, emotion can still arise, but it is proportional. It moves through rather than taking over. Joy is felt without clinging. Sadness is felt without collapse. Even conflict can be engaged without becoming identity. The experience remains fluid because it is not immediately owned. This neutrality is not something you stay in permanently. Life requires engagement, interpretation, and commitment. The key is that neutrality becomes a place you can return to, a baseline you recognize. From there, meanings are chosen rather than imposed. You step into experience instead of being pulled into it. As this becomes familiar, reality starts to feel less personal in the reactive sense and more personal in the participatory sense. Events are no longer proof of who you are or how life treats you. They are invitations to relate. The world feels less like a verdict and more like a conversation. This changes how responsibility is felt. You are no longer responsible for controlling outcomes, but you are responsible for how you meet them. The way you look, the way you listen, the way you interpret, these become creative acts. Reality does not harden around you as quickly. It stays malleable longer, responsive to the quality of your presence. The neutral reality does not remove challenge, but it removes the unnecessary struggle layered on top of it. What remains is direct contact with what is happening now, before it becomes a story about past or future. In that contact, life feels less heavy, even when it is serious. From here, a final realization begins to take shape. If reality responds to observation, if attention and belief shape experience, and if neutrality offers a point of choice, then change does not require force. It requires a shift in how observation itself is held. When that shift becomes consistent, reality does not need to be managed. It changes as a natural consequence of how it is being seen. When you change the way you observe, reality does not resist you. It adjusts. Not because the world is obedient, but because it has always been relational. You were never meant to control it, fix it, or escape it. You were meant to meet it. And the quality of that meeting has been shaping your experience all along. Nothing here requires belief, only attention, only honesty about how you look, where you tighten, where you assume, where you rush to meaning. The moment observation becomes conscious, life stops feeling like something that happens to you and starts feeling like something you participate in. The world does not need to change first. The observer does. If this perspective resonated, write this sentence in the comments so I know you stayed until the end. I am noticing how I see. And if this exploration spoke to you and you want to go deeper, choose one of the videos appearing on your screen now. It continues exactly from here. For those who are ready to observe a little more clearly,